Hi, I'm Dr. Andrea Goeglein, and thank you so much for stopping back again for today's conversation. And today's conversation is going to be about the future of work, particularly the different ideas between the generations. Before I introduce Jackson to you, I want you to know that the power of networking really works, because Jackson actually wrote me on LinkedIn a private message because he and I shared both having done podcasts for a podcast I absolutely love and recommend, Live Happy. And I can't stress enough that no matter what your age or no matter where you are in your career, LinkedIn, who does not pay me for anything, is an incredible resource. So let me introduce Jackson Kerchis. Other than flubbling your name, which you will say properly for me, I want to thank you for taking the time today and for taking the initiative to reach out to me. So Jackson, why don't you, one, tell everyone how to correctly pronounce your name, and two, give us a little bit more than the elevator speech, just a little bit more.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. Well, so it's Jackson Kerchis, which you pretty much, we'll give it to you 90% of the way.
Okay.
And I appreciate the networking thing. Yes, I'm a big believer in networking, and actually my business partner, who we do a lot of our happiness work for businesses and organizations, same thing. I thought, well, this guy's cool. Why don't I direct message him on LinkedIn? And next thing you know, we're co-authoring a book together and doing trainings and things. So love that. But
and let me tell you something. That's something that I hope everyone my age really appreciates about your generation. And tell everyone what generation you are part of.
Yeah, so I'm a millennial. I'm right on the cusp, I think, but I was born in 97. So depending on which.
Yeah. So you straddle. You definitely have your foot in many generational worlds. But the point I want to make is that your first point of contact is most likely going to be through a social medium, a social platform. You're not about to call someone up randomly and and make a cold call. And I just wanted to bring that up because I deeply appreciate that. It gives me time to check out who you are, why you would be writing, So now that I've interrupted you, go ahead, tell the world about yourself.
Oh, that's no problem. Yeah, well, I guess my quick story is, I guess at a high level, I'm very much interested in the study of happiness, and I like to bring that into both work and life. So I've sort of had my interest of straddled both, bring this into the corporate world with businesses and organizations, and I'm a member of the working world and corporate strategy and operations, but also just life in general, living as a monk, these sorts of things. So this all started, I'd say it was my sophomore year of college. I finished my economics major in 2 years. I was in the management consulting, very high octane path. Well, I sort of thought, well, I kind of finished up, like, what do I want to study? Like, what do I want to do with my life? And, that's a lovely question to grapple with in your 20s, as we all know. And I just landed on, well, I guess I could study happiness, right? Like, that's what this is all about. And that day, when I had that insight, I applied to create my own major, and the rest was history. I spent the last few years at the University of Alabama doing research, kind of creating my own major, and even taught a happiness habits course at the University of Alabama, and pretty much decided, like, this is really the area that I'm passionate about. After graduation, as I touched on, lived as a Zen monk. And so now I've entered into the working world, and still very much interested in kind of the study of happiness, and then of course sharing those life lessons and research with others.
Okay, so I want to unpack a few different sections. The first one, which really excited me when you and I got to finally speak, was that moment that you had the insight about, I want to study happiness. Can you give us a little hint what may have come before that? Like, oh, I think I'll be happy today. What was that?
Yeah, well, so I think it tends to be the typical view of creativity, or these insights that often happen where you obsess and you ruminate and you're stuck on something, and then finally you sort of ease off and the answer flashes into your mind. It was very much that cliche. I was obsessing over it, And I think I started to get on the right track when I started to really question, like I said, like, what's the one thing worth studying? If I was going to study something for the rest of my life, I'm a nerd. I love to learn. I can be an expert in anything, but like, what do I really want to get at here? And then it flashed into my mind. And once I thought that way, it's kind of like, well, you know, like, to study anything else almost seems like kind of a roundabout thing, right? If I can study finance so that I can make a bunch of money and then be happy. And it's like, well, why not just be more linear? You know, I'll just study happiness.
Right. Well, that is really terrific. And I will say that you, a generation later, found what was one of the premises that Marty Seligman said that, the research was observing early in the field of positive psychology, that particularly for the therapist who went into the field, that they were noticing that they had the highest level of well-being, that they actually enjoyed their work the most. And I know that that became true for me at that moment in time between 03 and 04, when Marty's work came to me and getting into the Authentic Happiness coaching program opportunity came about. Yeah, I had loved the work I did in my doctorate, but this opened up the field of positive psychology and the understanding of what makes people happy when they are doing their livelihood and creating the life they want economically and in all other ways. So that was part. Then, unlike my generation, I don't think I have, I'm doing a 5-decade scan. And I don't think I know one person who was your age who decided to go off and be a monk. So fill us in on that one.
Well, it really is interesting in that I think that the Buddhist tradition, and I wouldn't necessarily say I'm even a Buddhist, but I'm more Buddhist inspired, that I actually view Buddhism as sort of a predecessor of psychology more than a religion, because it was all about these sages and monks who just study the mind through first-person experience. And so the way that relates to this is actually before even the happiness major, I think it planted the seeds. I watched a TED talk by Matthew Ricard, Buddhist monk, often called the happiest man alive, although he hates that title. And he basically said the traditional view of happiness, especially in the Western world, where you work really hard to get all these things and you're successful and you have all these pleasures, is probably not so accurate, because these pleasures and these things, they kind of wear out as you use them. And real happiness is this lifelong practice, cultivating and mind training, and even showed these brain scans of monks who've meditated for more than 10,000 hours and how they're the normal people's brains and things. So wow, this is incredible. I'm just going to do an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course, John Kabat-Zinn, kind of the classic secular mindfulness, and did it. I could go on a whole 10-minute story here. I won't do that, but totally changed my life. I had anger issues, broke my hand punching a wall, dislocated my shoulder getting into a fight, kind of a wild child in a lot of ways. And this thing really just transformed me. I felt like for the first time I was running the show. And so mindfulness was always a pillar of my life. And I thought, well, I need to invest in this with some long-term immersive practice. And it just so happened to align really well with my interest in happiness, right? Because that's really what.
And absolutely it does, because I know that through my training in emotional intelligence in the late 90s, the mindfulness, and I had the opportunity to be in rooms with them when they were teaching this in the late 90s, and it was alien stuff. And I know that in my own history, the closest I came from being quiet in the morning, it was because I had no one to talk to on the train, and writing looked like, a food diary. I mean, I just wasn't into that. And then in my doctoral program, I took a leadership and spirituality class, and you were required to write every single day. And I was one mad hornet. I just knew that professor clearly didn't have a big enough life. And that's why she had time to do this. She is still in my life 25 years later. And it is, again, it's that thing that lays the foundation. You have that spark of inspiration to go into a field that nourished you. And then you You brought the main food to the party. You actually slowed down. And that, I want to compliment you, because that is something that your generation, and clearly the next generation, has, as it's so much a part of your conversation. So I'll ask the next part. Do you have friends where you sit around talking, like outside the work stuff, where you teach it? Do you have friends that you would also say you share these habits with?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you bring it up, because I have these little tidbits and facts from studies written down. But I think that the personal experience to me has been a lot more eye-opening. When I often joke, or it's not even a joke at this point, but I say, like, I think we're in another 60s style consciousness revolution with my generation. Again, I think my generation, there's some things we certainly struggle with, but for the most part, I really respect my generation, because exactly what you said. I think that we tend, especially the sort of high performing young talent demographic, really values like quality of life and enjoying our lives, and viewing life holistically outside of just sort of this narrow lane of prestige or what we think of as normal success. But yeah, I mean, happy to share a few examples, conversations, but they tend to be things like my group in management consulting. So I was in the management consulting at Alabama. I had experience with PwC consulting. And so I was really on that track of the very high performer. And a lot of them already have taken early exits to work in nonprofits or Teach for America. One friend who could have gone to a more prestigious office and made more money decided to stay to a smaller regional office. I have a friend who works at a huge tech consulting firm who's already like, dude, they're making me come back to the office. I'm about to leave. And his girlfriend works in investment banking, and it's the same story. She's like, what? Like, what are we doing? Like, already after a few months, like, I don't know if it's worth it.
And this has been part of the conversation. And I have a blog coming out that I'll make sure that I link to this when this video goes up. But I've been sitting with a very interesting, I call it the real social dilemma. And for me, the real social dilemma is that it is lovely that we are raising the next generation to appreciate life at a different level. But what does happen to the social safety net if everyone decides to work on their own? And like, what is the system that helps during the secular? Because the one thing about life, just forget the financial markets, everything's going to be secular, and it's going to go around, and it's never all going to be up or all going to be down. And how do we design systems that actually are as flexible to accommodate the consciousness? Because to your point, and I've heard you say this many times to me, that it's like a 60s consciousness. I will say that I am noticing more attributes between 60-year-olds today and 25 and 30-year-olds when it comes to how they want to live their life and design the work. They don't want to stop working. They just don't want to work the way they used to work. And in your case, you don't want to get burnt out. You saw what we did. No. Don't need to do that. Don't need to do that. But, you mentioned one field in particular, which really intrigued me during the 2020 and 21 closures. Investment banking. Some of the biggest investment banks, the leaders, came out and said, oh, no, you've got to come back to the office. But you're saying, you've got friends that may not be willing to do that.
Yeah, that's right. I do have some friends in that space who aren't quite so willing, and I have sort of through the, I don't know what the word is, water cooler discussions with alumni. I've even heard of some more senior people at these banks saying, like, worrying a little bit or asking questions of like, I don't know how we're gonna get this talent. And I don't know that it's just investment banking. I think this is happening in a lot of large companies that have very competitive industries, but I do think oftentimes their cultures are not very worker friendly. And so they're one of these services have to say, do we want to innovate and kind of challenge the status quo when it comes to work-life balance, or do we want to not be able to compete on young talent? I really do. Think that's the reality.
And I think, the absolute fact is that it is not, because this is, that part of Marty Seligman's work, the second part where he came up with PERMA, and he said, there are these attributes, the positive emotions, the engagement, the relationships and meaning and achievement. That does not go away when you seek well-being as a way of being. And that seems to be the misnomer from those who run the organizations at this point, that it's an either or situation versus the flexibility that this is what we strive towards. And we do want to work, whoever we are, but you've got to do it on different terms. Yeah. So I want you to think about work at its most perfect. What are you doing? What does it look like? Share.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can share, I guess, maybe my view, but for me personally, it's going to be a little weird because I'm this weird guy who studies happiness and lives as a monk, but I'll hit on some principles that I think are more universal.
Yep.
And I think that the big one, thinking about some of these studies I looked at, so one that stood out to me was PwC ran this big report on millennials at work. And so they found really interesting tidbit I thought here was development and work-life balance more important than things like cash bonus and the financial side. So I think, and this applies to me again, just more universal instead of case specific, feeling a sense of engagement and development. I have friends who have described internships at these sort of old, big established like financial companies where they're like, yeah, my job was basically to show up and be in the office for 3 months.
Isn't that crazy?
It sucks. And he obviously he didn't go back there. So go ahead.
Well, when one of the things that I know, and I am respectful of this also, if you're in your early 20s, you've kind of out of college and you're holding these ideas, you don't have the mortgage, the mates, the offspring yet. And so I think it is natural that you're a little looser. But looking into the future, and I know on my end, there are people who make very clear decisions that if the only thing I can get now is more money, and no, I want more time. I mean, that trade-off is so clear. And I love, do you have, and I don't mean to put you on the spot because I just haven't looked it up. When I started studying happiness, there was this financial level that, the degree of happiness doesn't shift all that dramatically after this point, and it was $50,000. Then it went to $75,000. Do you know what that number is today?
Yes. When you factor in inflation, it's around 98,000.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I hadn't. And then I wonder, what is your most favorite research that you've come up with lately, that you've come across?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think, well, one of the a movement that I've been really interested in lately that relates to our conversation fittingly is this 4-day work week conversation. I don't know if you've seen that, but it started with, I listened to Bolt, which is a big startup, their CEO, Ryan Breslow announced it. They did a big podcast. I actually wrote a LinkedIn article that went viral that was like, is America ready for the 4-day work week? Like, hell yes, in all caps. They got like 30,000 reads. And so that whole topic, and as I've looked more into it, I've saw Angel List, which is a big kind of startup hub. Okay. They said 50 companies they just announced that are pushing the 4-day work week. We have this guy, Andrew Barnes, out of New Zealand, who's kind of architecting this big movement and trying to put some research behind rolling this out. So this whole conversation and the general consensus they found is, and I want to do the caveat, this might vary if you're working in a very one in, one out, like an industrial setting, of course,
Correct.
right? If you're a farmer or something, right?
Correct.
But in most knowledge worker environments, it's the same productivity when you cut down to that 4-day week.
Yep. And this is a fun thing. So two things. One, I want to make sure that we get the link of that LinkedIn article so that I get that in the description, because I would also love to read that. And I am laughing because I had just released a video in my Books That Matter category where I did the 4-hour work week by Tim Ferriss. And I tell a story on how when that book came out, Tim was in my self-help world. And he and I actually had a conversation, and I thought the child was nuts. Like, why do I want to go to South America and tango? And why do I just thought the kid was crazy. And, fast forward 15, 18 years, I'm laughing at how nearsighted I was and how farsighted he was, and from a very clear perspective. He saw something that I just couldn't understand why you would want it. And seeing now the next generation craft their lives. And again, I want to bring this up 100 times. There is no generation of humans who will not strive to achieve. That's our DNA. We, when we were cave people, we wanted to find the wheel. We will always strive. That is a fallacy that people don't want to work. What we have noticed in my observation is that we designed a system that only worked for that system and made every other part of the human system and family and community just fall to hell. And now that we're seeing it, we really want parts. And your generation is saying, our terms are no terms. You're not that blatant, but through every little ounce. So I'll go back to that question again about looking out 5 years from now. What will Jackson be doing, and how will he be doing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think that for me, as you touched on, we're always going to achieve in my generation. But I think the big thing that, in my opinion, some generations past have made, but sometimes just the cultural conversation we make is, I always tell people success without happiness is failure. Mm-hmm. And I think more importantly, understanding not to even necessarily confuse the two, right? Sometimes we think of success and it's almost like I have to sacrifice my happiness to be successful. And I think our generation is more like, whoa. Happiness is success. Like that's the metric. And that's no different for me. So I took a kind of an early exit from consulting to join a firm that has, I think, very good work-life balance. And so I've enjoyed my time here so far. So as I look out 5 years, I think one way or another, I'll be like applying this in the study of happiness. And whether it's within my current organization where we have some of these people practices and things, or continuing some of the work I've started doing on my own with speaking, consulting, and actually just got my first couple coaching clients in the last 2 months, which has been exciting. One way or another, it's like I said, to me, this kind of study of happiness, teaching, education, and actually putting it to work in the world is what I'm ultimately interested in. So I know for sure, one form or another, that's what I'll be doing in 3 to 5 years.
On that note of putting it to work in the world, I will say that that's a perfect place for us to end. And, Jackson, would you let everyone know the best place to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can follow me on LinkedIn, I think is a great place to follow me, or connect with me if you wanted to exchange ideas. But it's Jackson Kerchis on LinkedIn, and we'll put a link to that. And
absolutely,
not many other Kerchises out there, so you should find me.
Well, that's incredible. So thank you so much for this conversation. I look forward to us having many, many more of them for sure. And I am Dr. Andrea Goeglein, and thank you so much for stopping by. Please always do subscribe and leave a comment as long as it is thoughtful and you want to engage on a level of integrity that will get us both excited to respond to you. So thank you again. And Jackson, thank you, and have a beautiful rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for reaching out. Bye-bye.